make up 70% of the healthcare workforce, but only 20% of its leadership. On Her Story, we'll explore the careers of bold and influential women from Silicon Valley to Capitol Hill and learn how they've overcome the odds. I'm your host, Angela Jane, and this is Her Story, a program where we explore what's beyond the glass ceiling. I'm excited to introduce you to Jane Chao, co-founder and CEO of Ceribell. Ceribell is a medical device company that focuses on real-time diagnosis and treatment of patients with seizures. Jane, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me, Angela.
So your background is really quite extraordinary. I mean, trained as a scientist, went to film school, worked in a variety of different healthcare and non-healthcare companies, and to now founding your own company. As you think about your foray into healthcare leadership, would you consider yourself to be an accidental or intentional leader?
I think I started as an accidental leader, and I'd like to think I'm an intentional leader now, but not everything went with the plan for sure. There's a lot of exploration and a big dose of luck.
Yeah, you're in good company there with a lot of our leaders on Her Story. So I guess let's start with the origin story. So you grew up in a small town in China. How did that kind of shape your professional and personal ambitions as a young child?
In a very significant way. So when I grew up, I always just loved science, even when I was a little girl. And this is back in the early 90s before China opened up, right? So it was still very kind of old fashioned. I was just told, even when I was just 10 years old, I remember vividly, I can't be good in science because I'm a girl. So because of that, I have developed probably the biggest imposter syndrome you can think of. I always think I will not make it. So I just worked really, really hard because I just really love science. So I think what that taught me in earlier days is less about what I can win or not. It just really ask myself, what do I really, really like? So I decided even when I was young, because I just love the discoveries, the nature of science, and I went through that, and that has been my North Star for many years. And that's why came to the US, did my PhD, and at the time thinking I would just do research and be a faculty somewhere and pursuing science.
For those of us that are probably, less familiar with all the different science disciplines, I mean, why did you decide you went to Cornell for your PhD? Why did you decide biophysics?
I really liked math and was mostly math when I grew up. But then when I went to high school and college, I thought, oh, I'm a girl. I was told I would never be good at it. So maybe I can choose something softer. Maybe it's chemistry. So I did chemistry for my undergrad. And then I realized in grad school, I thought maybe I can take a risk. Maybe I can go back to physics and go to a field that's really rising. And when I was in graduate school about 15 years ago, bio and it's from chemistry to physics all goes to the molecular mechanism, a lot of discovery in science and life science. So that's what I got into. So my PhD was about protein structure, the molecular level of structure that lead to different mechanism and drug discovery and functions we have. I just find that as a fascinating topic and has a sense of beauty in it as well as you look at the molecules and proteins.
And so, it sounds like one of the themes in your life, where you started early on is kind of being one of the only girls or told that, girls can't do this. So how many women were there in your PhD program?
I don't know the exact number, but there are a few. I was not the only one. Um, Probably 10%. Yeah, 5 to 10%. So that's I was in the kind of a special science program in high school. So out of 25 classmates, there are two girls. I was one of them. So I'm used to being the minority in the room.
Yeah, it's interesting. I'm sure we could have a whole segment just on, kind of stories that we'd share. I know when I was getting my PhD, there were, even though there were other women, we were, always comments made around, if we needed to take breaks or do things certainly differently from our male counterparts, right? So it's
Yes,
definitely an
we were
interesting.
delicate flowers.
Yeah, exactly. But so one of the things that I know, as I reflect on my own PhD experience, and I'm curious how you would view it, is there are a lot of parallels actually between kind of doctoral research and doctoral training and being an entrepreneur. How have you thought about some of those translatable lessons from those early days to what you're doing today in building Ceribell?
I think one is this open-mindedness. Because as a scientist, you have a hypothesis, but you are completely open when you go in and say, I would design experiment to prove it wrong or to prove it right. And as you build up a business, and especially when you build up a company and build a business model product from ground zero, there are so many directions you can go and have that open-mindedness and solving problems and be open to see failures and success and detect early signals, fail early, pilot early. I think that's probably one of the biggest skill sets I developed as a scientist and was able to use that. And I think another part of it is probably more psychological readiness. As you know, when you were doing science, 99% of the time is failure. Most experiments don't work, right? And so I got trained so used to things don't work and take that as the opportunity of discovery instead of being discouraged. And as you're an entrepreneur and building things from ground zero, that's a very, very helpful and positive, I think, just mental readiness.
I think that ground zero point really resonates, at least with me personally. I don't know about you, but my first day of my PhD program, I remember our program director said, your job here while you're here, if this is the realm of knowledge, is to basically create something that expands it just a little bit here. And so if you think about, building companies, it's right, you have to create something that doesn't exist, but is adding value to kind of what is beyond what is already there. So I think that speaks a lot to lessons learned. I think I'll go off on a limb here and say that you're very unique not only for having a scientific training, but then after getting your PhD, instead of maybe taking a traditional academic job or going to work in a kind of biophysics like industry area, you went to film school. Tell us about that decision.
It was my early mid-age crisis. Because for decades, as I mentioned earlier, I just love science. I always thought I'm gonna be a faculty and doing research somewhere. And then towards the end of my PhD, I felt something that's missing for me. And I wanted more, maybe closer human interactions. Maybe I wanted more direct social impact. I'm not saying academic job don't offer that, not enough for me. So I got so lost. I thought, what is this one thing? Go back to the North Star. What is this one thing I really, besides science, I'm really passionate about? And believe it or not, at the time, I decided it was film. I always just love movies. So I borrowed I came from a very humble family, so I actually borrowed $6,000 from a friend. And then at the time, China was still very cheap. So I went to China, to Beijing Film Academy, and did 1 year cinematography because I thought growing up in China, I never was given the opportunity to explore the artistic side. What if that is my call? So I did that, and I quickly find out, no, it's not. But it was such a precious gift. I gave it to myself. It didn't work out. I came back to the US for my postdoc, but I would absolutely do it again, even now knowing the result. Um, I feel I feel one thing I learned that was not so much in the scientific training is the connection with people. Because filmmaking is all about seeing people from almost the most humanistic way, right? Of course, empathy and vulnerability are the buzzwords these days, and I believe in them. But 15 years ago, when I was in graduate school, they were not buzzwords. In film school, I was able to, I remember doing documentaries with immigrant workers in Beijing who just had so little um, documentary talking to kids who has mostly mental illness that was not fully recognized even by the family. It would just help me to look at people from a just a very different way. I think I still today benefit from that.
I mean, that's really remarkable. I mean, I'm more on the scientist track, so I forget what is it, right brain or left brain, but you kind of have strengths in both the left and right side of your kind of creative juices and the more structured side. So what was it like then transitioning back? So kind of after film school, then you went back into what I'll call a structured environment, but in more of like a big corporate setting. So McKinsey and Novartis. Tell us a little bit about kind of the work that you were doing there and what that experience was like.
McKinsey is actually a continuation of, I was trying to figure out what I want to do. I still remember McKinsey hosts this, they have this beautiful, fantastic program for PhDs, not just for MBAs like many other consulting firms. So I was in their open house. One of the McKinsey at the time employee who did his PhD in theoretical physics told me, if you don't know what to do, this is a fantastic place to be. So I joined, and I learned so much about business. Just it's my paid MBA and beyond that. So through my McKinsey period, I pretty much did every single industry projects in every single industry. That's when I really discovered where my passion and where I want to be. And that is in healthcare because I love the social impact and how I know my work would help people. And I also realized my strength is to bridge technology and commercialization because I speak both languages very fluently and intuitively. So that's really the pathway I transitioned from academia to industry. I'm so grateful to my experience there. And then I realized at McKinsey I was too far from technology and innovation. So that's why I moved to Novartis in Basel in Switzerland, and had the opportunity to work closer to the late stage portfolio to drug discovery more directly. So that was after I figured out where I want to be, that became a no brainer.
Sounds like a lot of different puzzle pieces coming together from all these different stints in your career. So as you think about those pieces coming together, you had been up until that point working in pretty large organizations and companies with a lot of structure and a very defined path. At what point did you decide to kind of make the pivot then to building and co-founding your own company, and what was that shift like?
I always know I want to work in a startup, either as a founding member or team member or as a founder. I probably have accumulated 20, 30 ideas. None of them worked. I love the creative process. And I love to see my impact can actually translate to a bigger impact, which was why I left academia. And it's harder to have that in big companies. Um, and in terms of how I made that transition, I have to say it was quite natural for me because I'm always a doer. I always want to get things done, and so as I left the big company, I was actually less comfortable. When I get to build my own company with the other two co-founders, everything came pretty natural because I got the luxury to work with the co-founders to define the product, define the strategy. It all come from me. I don't have 10 other stakeholders to please. And then the most luxurious thing is I got to choose who will be on my team. And then once I get that right, the rest of the job becomes so easy.
So let's take a step back then. So I know you have a couple of co-founders. Where did the idea from Ceribell actually come from?
The other two co-founders, one is Dr. Joseph Parvizi. He's a neurologist at Stanford. And the other is Professor Chris Schaaf. He is a musician slash computer scientist, a professor at Stanford. They're both faculties at Stanford. The idea came from Joseph about almost 10 years ago. He was in a concert and hearing this music generated by the signals NASA spaceship collected from the universe, and they turned the signal to music. And then he thought, if we can turn that signal to music, how about the other universe, which is the brain, which we knew so little about? So the first idea came from turning the brain signal to music. And then he found Chris Schaaf, who's a musician, and turn any signal to music. So they started as an art project. And then Joseph realized there is a big gap between the big difference between the normal brain and seizure brain. And he sees this often, and he often see when patient transferred from other hospitals outside Stanford, patient has been seizing for many, many hours. So then he started thinking, can this be translated into a medical device and help patients? And that's when I get to know them about 7 years ago. So really to really, there are 10 different directions we could go with that idea. So it's really to define, again, our North Star of the company is where are patients dying because of this, and where can we make the biggest difference? And also, what are the bottlenecks now? And we can change, we can remove every single bottleneck. So after scanning the market, here's the McKinsey training comes so natural. I scan all the market and talk to tens of physicians, read hundreds of papers, and realize, okay, it's really in the ICU patients are dying. We can make the biggest difference. And then besides the brain sound, which help diagnosis, we need the hardware. And I see earlier days there was AI play, so I was um, very just very optimistic. We can build a cloud-based platform so we can have the data and use the machine learning to further augment diagnosis. And in hindsight, everything's like, of course, but at the time, very few people were talking about AI, and taking the company data to cloud was a big risk. So in hindsight, everything worked out, but honestly, at the time, there's half data driven, half just the gut. You have to take the risk if you want to do something big. So I can't take full credit. It's really the team effort, and there's a big dose of luck in it as well.
For sure. But it sounds like your co-founder team really has a lot of complementary strengths. And I think that's so important when building a company. So I can see how that all comes together. So for the non-technical scientific me, kind of simplify it a little bit further. So I know Cerebell focuses on patients with seizures, but specifically what do you all actually do and what does your technology do for this patient population?
So often when we think about seizure, we think about epilepsy patients. The seizures are transient. They are benign. Patient can live with seizures for years, and they're visible. Usually, you see convulsion. When you move to ICU and acute care patient population, the seizures are complete opposite. They are usually not visible, and patient can be in coma or just confused. And they are not transient. Patient can seize for hours or days, and therefore they are not benign. Patient, it can lead to very high mortality and morbidity. It's very similar to stroke. We say time is brain. The early detection of stroke is arguably the biggest driver for best outcome. Exactly same for seizure in ICU patients. So the guideline requires to have EEG, and EEG is the main tool you can diagnose seizure, especially when patients are non-convulsing, which is the majority of the patient in the ICU. So in the ideal world, the guideline require you get that diagnosis within an hour. And before Ceribell, not a single hospital on the planet can be compliant with that guideline. The best hospital will take 4 or 5 hours. A very good hospital will sometimes take a day. And small hospitals simply don't have EEG. So you see patient acquire secondary brain injury, which is long-term memory loss, IQ drop, or even die just because their seizure were not detected. And literally you see this, I remember that video. It's an elderly patient. The EEG on the bedside was showing he's in non-convulsive status, which is a very urgent neurological condition, and he's in coma. And probably his daughter was sitting right next to him, not knowing that his dad is going through a neurological urgency because there's no tool to diagnose it. So our system, and the reason is because conventional EEG is very cumbersome to set up. Very few people know how to set it up and takes hours. So our system have a hardware anybody can set up in a few minutes. And then we have a machine learning algorithm that can perform as well as a well-trained neurologist and would tell the bedside physician who usually do not know how to interpret EEG data, the instant result is the patient in status or not. So it completely transforms how seizures not only are detected, but also how these patients are managed because you can see how a patient can respond to the medication and whether or not you need to increase the dose or add the second line medication to the patients.
That's incredible. So, you talked a little bit earlier about in some ways it probably felt natural, building this company and the ideas and having more of that, creativity and, building your team. There's a lot of steps involved in building a company, from the original idea to fundraising to, scaling, building the product, right? There's a lot of steps. what was the most challenging part?
I think every year, every phase, there are different challenges, as of course, as very cliched. Maybe it's the most emotional episode I still remember, right? It was about fundraising. So this was exactly 4.5 years ago. And we had a prototype, but we did not have FDA approval yet. So we didn't have any product to sell. And this is often the industry could call it the death valley for the company. We raised the seed round, we used up the money, and we don't have product to show yet, and we need another $10 million. I was pregnant at the time. I was 1 month pregnant, so my goal was to raise the next round in 5 months, and hopefully nobody see. What happened was when I was still breastfeeding my son, he was 4 months old, and finally I closed that round. But I remember so many meetings that I would walk into the room with my big belly and with my accent, and as a first time CEO who has never worked in medtech before and have the product that's not ready commercially, and tell the investor, please just write me a $10 million check. I promise you, we're gonna succeed. And understandably, most investors said no. And I'm just so grateful that we had one investor saw the potential in me, in the other founding team, and wrote us that check. And I'm so very proud that we're going to give him very good return. But that's probably the hardest times that when I delivered my son Aiden, we were about to file FDA. Literally, I was still on the bedside. I was 36, 37 when I delivered. He's a big baby, so it was a very difficult procedure. But I was remembering checking the FDA material and went back to work 2 weeks after I delivered after surgery. So yeah, but I would do it again.
Oh my goodness. Okay, wow, that is incredible. I mean, clearly the theme in your life is kind of beating the odds and doing a lot of the unexpected. So I want to come back to a couple of points you made there, but let's go back to one thing. So fundraising, I mean, the company is what, just over 6 years now. You recently raised a Series C. Congratulations. So have come a long way. And, to your point, first time CEO. So the CEO role has to wear a lot of different hats, especially along different stages of the company's growth from those early days to probably what you're focused on now. Tell us a little bit about kind of how your priorities personally as CEO, and then kind of some of your leadership skills have had to adapt and evolve kind of from those, year one to kind of where you are now, year six plus.
Just as the challenge each year at each phase is different, the requirement and what the CEO, this leadership skill sets also just really change every year. I think in earlier days, the first couple of years was a lot about being highly strategic and really make sure the product definition and the direction that I'm pointing the companies to go is the right direction. Um, and um, and then a lot of it is to bring the best R&D team and to translate what the product needs, the market needs very clearly to the technical terms, and brainstorm with the team and find the solutions, find the technical solutions. So the first couple of years was very, very clinical, um, product focused and R&D focused. Um, and then we went through this 1 or 2 year phase of launching the product. And that's when it's a lot about, again, it's figuring out the puzzle, figuring out what does it change, what does it need to change physician and nurse behaviors, because they have been doing this for 10, 20 years. We're introducing something completely new and disruptive. And how do we generate enough and more evidence to make that change? How do we refine our messaging? And most importantly, how do we find the right marketing and sales and commercial talents to do it, right? And so I was the sales number one, as many founders do. And I never thought I would be a salesperson, but then I realized sales is actually the same as being a consultant. You understand your customers' needs and you provide the solutions. So that was a lot of learning about just how to launch a product. And I think the biggest, those two are just naturally in my core competence, I would say. So I did a really good job. It didn't challenge me at the leadership front. I think the biggest the growth or challenge, they always come together, is the past, I would say, 18 months as we really grow the organization very rapidly and dealing with COVID. Um, it's really about how do we find the right people, and that's a skill set and art. It's hard to articulate, and also see around the corner that what the leadership and the talent pool we need, and more importantly, how do I switch from the problem solver, which was who I am for the longest time, to just really empower the team to bring the best people and bring the best out of the team, and really step back and let the team shine, and bring people who are better than me and can have years of expertise in field in domains we need. I think learn how to let go, find the best talent, and then bring them together and bring the best out of them is probably the biggest growth, and I think it's the absolute need for a good leader.
Absolutely. Well, it's easier said than done, but it definitely is always about the people for sure. I want to go back to a point that you mentioned earlier. So, early on in life as a child, you were basically told that your path was going to be different because you were a female, right? They said that you couldn't do science. And then you mentioned, you were trying to hide may not be the right word, but you were trying to fundraise and kind of make sure that people didn't really know you were pregnant, or keep that under the radar, whatever you what might have you. How, as from a professional career point of view, particularly in the more kind of recent years, in your journey as a CEO, how has kind of the female lens, was it harder to raise money, you think? Were there any instances where you were treated differently when you were trying to fundraise while being pregnant? Anything to that effect?
I mean, the fact is, I would never know whether or not the fact I'm a female or I have an accent, I'm Asian, that a factor. Um, if I think about rationally, yes, it has been probably, and it will always be a factor. Sometimes the bias is conscious, sometimes it's not conscious. But, or and, I would say what I have experienced with, I count on the investors and partners who believed in me, because that for those people I know, that's not a factor for them. They see through what's on the surface. They see the mission. They see what we created together as a team, and they see me as who I am as a leader. And I've been very fortunate to have mentors and investors who really believed in me and supported me. And I really see the past 2 years is for me to get out of the imposter syndrome, and to get to the place that I'm confident, but I'm still humble and open-minded. And I can't tell you how good that feels, to go through that transformation. Again, it's easier said than done. And I feel I can do that because of all the mentors I had.
To that point, I mean, I think it always takes a village, right, on the personal side and professional side. And so finding that community and network of support systems is really important. So, one of the things, we can plan all we want, but personal and professional doesn't always align. So a little bit back to the story about, delivering your son as a single mom while you're also going through FDA approval, and, you just can't time those things. A lot of founders are similarly, going through, varied experiences where they're either planning for maternity leave, but, how do you leave your own company and how do you talk to your investors about it? What advice do you have for, other women generally, but also other women founders who are kind of in this senior role, who are kind of juggling the two, and, maybe the timing isn't ideal, whether it's you just raised a fund or you're at a certain, inflection point in the growth journey. What advice would you have?
Don't overthink it, because you will be overwhelmed. If someone, like when I start fundraising, actually when I at very beginning started, I was still married at the time. Um, I didn't know all the obstacles. I didn't count all the no's I would have gotten, and also in hindsight, I didn't know all the challenges I will have. So all I focused is, this is the next step. I need to get this done and do it. And it might be risky. If we start to think about the perfect timing, often we probably just won't make the first step. I give you like the example is as I think my whether or not to have a second child, I start to get to the mode like keep thinking and then realize there's never gonna be a time that I feel I'm ready, right? If I had the same thought, I probably would not had my son, which would be the worst decision I've ever made in my life. And if I thought rationally at the time, I might get to the conclusion, say, there's no way I can do both. But somehow, when you are in the position, you often, many of us, would underestimate what we're capable of doing. You will rise to the occasion and you will have people around you support you and get you there. So don't overthink about it and lean in before you step back, right? And if you really truly believe that's something you want, go for it. You'll manage childcare. I managed it, and as a single mom, I'm still managing. And thankfully to the, of course, the financial resource I have, but I know we can all do it.
That's great advice and great perspective to keep in mind. I mean, I think the personal professional, I always struggle with this because it's really not a balance, right? We're always kind of just, making the best of what we can, but we all have things, personal outlets, routines that we have that kind of make the most of every day. What's your outlet?
Probably quite cliched. I still watch a lot of movies. I like more entertaining movies now than artsy movies back in film school. I exercise, so I do weightlifting with my trainer. So I also go for runs. I read a lot. And the silver lining of actually being a single mom, I have alone time when my son is with his dad. So I actually get to read a lot. And hopefully after COVID, I can get to spend more time with my friends. So really nothing that different. Oh, I did pick up meditation last year, thanks to a dear friend. It has been one of the best things I'm doing to myself and supporting myself.
You'll have to give me some pointers on that. I feel like meditation is the one thing I've always wanted to get into, but it just never quite happens.
That's what I thought because I was like, my mind is way too busy to do meditation. I can share already, if I may, I share a trick. My friend suggested after exercise, you do the meditation because your brain is more relaxed. You have, I don't want to go to a place that neuroscientists will yell at me, but you have all these neurotransmitters that's favorable for you to meditate and calm down. But I could say, even though I just have a big list, I think one thing that I think like many of us um, start doing differently after COVID or during COVID is this whole concept of self care, right? So I start to be more mindful, say, literally block my calendar for, I track my meditation time, I track my exercise time and sleep time, and make sure I'm doing self care as the top priority, even before my son and before the company, because that's the foundation of everything.
Absolutely. Well, if you can't take care of yourself, you can't take care of anyone else, right? Being a scientist, and you mentioned reading, and you're constantly reflecting on, different capabilities and skills that you need to build as a leader. As you kind of reflect on your experiences thus far, is there something that you believed early on in your career that you no longer believe?
I used to think as a CEO, as a leader, you have to be this very charismatic person. You get on stage, you can give this super inspiring motivational talks just on spot, right? And because of that, I always thought I can never be an inspiring leader. I thought I can just be a manager and manage things because I solve problems. And over the years, I realized there are different leaders. Um, the the bigger my responsibility become, the more I realize being a leader is so much of a reflection of being who we are. When I'm positive and supportive as a person, it will come out as a leadership that's positive and supportive. And so I start to realize I don't have to be this charismatic person and speak about give motivational speeches. I can build the leadership based on who I am. And so what is my strength, right? So my strength is I can really create a clear vision that it comes relatively easy for me, but might be very hard for other people to see. And I'm really passionate about that vision. I can motivate people and help people to see that vision. And I can see a path to get there. So that's how I lead my team. And also the other part, I really value everyone, that I want everyone to succeed. And it's not about me, it's about we all get to that goal together. And that makes the leader, because that's who I am. So I think that's probably the biggest myth I overcome over the years.
I mean, that's so powerful. I mean, that's one of the reasons that we wanted to create her story, because there is no best practice for, what makes a good leader, right? We all have our individual strengths and styles, and, getting to learn from, different people and different vantage points. I think that just helps, hopefully should help, change that perception that, you don't have to be the most charismatic, or you don't have to do this or do that. You can kind of embrace your own individuality with that. So I guess then, looking back to, the origin story to young Jane, growing up in this, small town China, what advice would you give your younger self?
Stop being so harsh on yourself. Stop criticizing yourself. Stop, just stop that. And of course, my younger self would not listen. In hindsight, it's really true. The younger version was so much about having this checkbox. I have to check every single box. The moment I achieve something is what's next. It's so much anxiety driven. And so much about prove myself to others, and without really knowing my own strengths. So now in hindsight, I would give the advice to myself, and maybe the maybe people who are younger than me, is focus on your strengths, and stop being too critical to yourself, and build on your strengths, because that's how we become excellent in something. And the best we can do to fix our weakness is just become okay, right? And we are never going to shine by fixing our weakness. We need to do that. But who we are, what we want to do, and what kind of leader we want to do will be based on our strengths, and be really clear about our own strengths.
So, as you know, we like to ask all of our guests, if they were to write their autobiography, what would be the title of their book? But I think I'll modify that for you, being the filmmaker, and say, if you were to, name your own documentary or film about Jane, what would be the title of it?
Oh gosh, part of the reason I quit film school is because I realized I'm so bad with wording, and so coming up with a film name is not my strength. Maybe something like how I overcame the biggest imposter syndrome and benefited from it. See, it's not a good title.
No, it's not about. It's not about. It's don't
But
judge a
that's
book
the
by its
theme.
cover.
Yeah, that's the theme. I'm sure
Yeah.
someone good with words would come up with something, but I think that summarized my journey.
We have so much to learn from you, Jane. Thank you for spending the time to share with us. You've had an extraordinary career thus far, and I know you're at a really interesting inflection point in the growth of Ceribell, and we're all really excited to continue to track your progress and see what else is in store. So thank you for your contributions to the industry.
Thank you for having me. It's really fun. I enjoyed it. Thank you.